The next leg of their journey took Ethan and Lyra to an abandoned observatory perched on a hill overlooking the town. According to the holographic map, the next shard of the artifact was hidden somewhere inside. The building looked old and neglected, its dome-shaped roof cracked and covered in vines. Windows were either shattered or boarded up, and the metal door groaned loudly when Lyra pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled damp and musty, like no one had been there in decades. Dust coated every surface, and broken equipment lay scattered across the floor. Despite its decay, the observatory still held a strange kind of beauty. A massive telescope stood in the center of the main room, pointing upward through the open dome toward the night sky. "This place gives me the creeps," Ethan said, glancing around nervously. "Do you think anyone's been here
Parker
recently?"
was lying on his bed.
Lyra, staring at the
shook her
ceiling.
head.
The
Not
room
for
was
years,
quiet
but
except
we should
for
stay
the faint
alert.
hum of the air
The
conditioner.
hunters
in the
might
corner.
already know we're coming.
It was late.
Ethan
and
nodded,
everyone in the house
gripping
had
the
gone to
flashlight
sleep
he'd brought
hours
from the
ago.
barn. His
Its
mom and
beam
dad
cut
were
through the
probably
darkness
sound.
as they moved deeper
Asleep
into
in
the
their
building.
bedroom down the hall.
The walls
and
were
his little
lined with
sister's
shelves
soft
filled with
breathing
old
could
books
be
and
heard through
papers,
the thin
many
walls.
of them crumbling with
Ethan,
age.
however,
Lyra
couldn't fall
paused
asleep.
to examine some of
He
the
tossed
documents,
and
her
turned,
glowing eyes
and
nothing
nothing
seemed to help.
The faded writing. His mind kept
These
racing
are
with
notes
thoughts
about
about
stars
school,
and
friends,
constellations
and
random
she said
things that
quietly.
didn't make much sense.
Someone
Doc,
spent a lot of
just
time
as he
studying the
started to feel
skies here.
drowsy.
A
Maybe
strange
they were
noise
looking
caught
for
his
aliens.
attention. Ethan
At
joked
first,
weakly.
it
Trying
sounded
to
like
lighten the
static
mood.
electricity,
But
crackling
Lyra didn't
somewhere.
laugh.
Instead,
Nearby.
she turned to
Then,
him with a
almost
serious
instantly,
expression. The sound
They
grew
probably
louder, filling the
were,
room with an eerie
she
hum.
said.
Your
Ethan
people
sat
have
up quickly,
always been curious
his heart
about
pounding.
what lies
He
beyond
looked
your
around,
world, trying to figure
It's
out
one
where
of
the
the
things
things
I
I
admire
admire
most about
The
humanity.
lamp on his nightstand
Ethan
felt
flickered
a small
once before
flicker of
steadying
pride at
itself
her
again,
words.
though it
What's
quickly
going
faded
on?
as they continued.
Ethan whispered to himself,
Their search,
gripping.
the shard
The edge of
wasn't
his
going to
blanket
find
tightly
itself,
docked
before
and
he
time
could get
was
up to
running
check
out.
what was happening. After searching
Something
several
incredible
rooms without
happened.
success,
A
they
bright
finally
light
began
reached
to
the
glow
basement.
near his closet.
A narrow staircase
It wasn't
led
harsh
down
or
into the
blinding,
darkness,
more like a
and the
shimmering
air
ripple
grew
in the
colder
air
with each
as
step.
if someone
At the
had spilled oil
bottom,
onto water
they found
and
a
let
heavy
it spread.
steel
door marked
Ethan's
with warnings
eyes
about
widened in
hazardous
shock.
materials.
He wanted to call
Lyra
out for his
examined the
parents,
lock carefully,
but no words
before
came
pulling
out.
out another device
All he
from her
could do
belt.
was watch as the
With
glowing
a few
patch
quick
grew
adjustments,
bigger and
the
brighter.
door clicked open,
And then,
inside
without
was a small
warning,
laboratory.
a
figure stepped out of the
untouched
light.
by time.
Ethan froze completely.
Shelves lined the
For
walls.
a moment,
holding jars
he thought he
filled
might
with
be
strange
dreaming.
liquids and
Standing in
preserved
front of him was a
specimens.
girl who looked
In
about
the
his
center
age.
of the room stood a
She
glass
had
case
long
containing a
silvery
glowing
hair
object,
that fell past
another
her
shard of
shoulders
the artifact.
and big.
There it is.
Almond-shaped eyes
Ethan
that
whispered,
sparkled faintly,
pointing at the case.
like they held tiny
But as
stars.
Lyra approached,
the lights in
inside
the room
them,
flickered.
her
and a
clothes
low
were
hum
strange,
filled
too
the
tight-fitting
air.
and metallic-looking,
Suddenly, panels
shimmering
in the ceiling
softly
slid
under
open,
the dim light of his
revealing
room.
cameras and sensors
She didn't look
that hadn't
scared
been
or
visible
lost.
before.
Instead,
A mechanical
she stood
voice
there
echoed
calmly,
through the space,
as if stepping out of glowing
Intruders
portals in the
detected.
people's bedroom.
Initiating containment
was
protocol.
perfectly normal.
Oh no,
Hi, she said.
Ethan muttered, her voice gentle.
What does
but
that
firm.
mean?
I'm Lyra.
It means we've triggered
Ethan
the
blinked
security
several
system.
times,
Lyra replied,
unsure if he should
her voice
laugh,
tense.
scream, or
We
pinch himself to wake
need
up.
to get the shard and leave
hi?
now.
Before they
managed
could
to
act,
say after a
the
long
ground
pause.
beneath them began to shake.
Who are?
Panels in
You?
the floor shifted.
And how did you
revealing
just
hidden
appear in
compartments
my
filled
room?
with robotic arms
Lyra
tipped
tilted
with
her
sharp
head slightly,
claws, studying him
They
with
started
those
moving towards
mesmerizing
Ethan
eyes.
and Lyra. Their
It's
movements
complicated,
jerky but purposeful.
she admitted. Stay
But
back.
I need your help.
Lyra
My
shouted,
help?
activating
Ethan
one of her
repeated,
still
devices.
struggling to process
A bright
everything.
pulse
of energy shot
You're
out,
telling me you
disabling
just
several of the
popped
arms.
into my room
But
from
more kept coming,
wherever that is.
forcing them to retreat
He pointed
further into
vaguely
the room.
toward the fading glow
Ethan
near
grabbed
his
a nearby
closet.
chair and
And now
swung
you
it at
want
one
my
of the
help?
robots,
She
knocking
nodded.
it aside.
Yes.
How do we shut
I
this
wouldn't
thing
have
off?
come
here if I
He
had
yelled
any
over
other
the noise.
choice.
The control
Ethan
panel.
opened his mouth to
Lyra
respond,
called
but
back,
stopped
pointing
when he
to a
noticed
console
something
near the
odd.
far wall.
The air
If
around
we can
Lyra
disable
seemed
the
different
system,
somehow,
we'll stop
like it
the
vibrated
robots.
slightly.
I'm on
even
it.
though nothing
Ethan darted toward
else in the room moved.
the console.
He shook
dodging
his head,
the grasping
trying to
claws of the
focus.
mechanical arms.
Okay.
He reached
he
the
said
panel
slowly.
and frantically
Let's
pressed
start with the
buttons,
basics.
hoping something
Where
would
exactly
work.
did you come from?
Finally,
the hum
I'm
in the
not
room
from
died
Earth.
down.
Lyra
and the
replied
robots froze
matter-of-factly.
mid-motion.
I'm from
We're
a planet.
clear. Called
Ethan
Zera.
shouted, breathing
It's
heavily.
very far away.
Lyra wasted no
Ethan
time.
stared at her,
She
waiting for the
smashed the glass
punchline.
case and retrieved
When
the
none
shard,
came,
which
he
glowed
sighed
brightly
deeply.
in her hand.
Right.
Let's,
Of course you are.
go,
Alien.
she said.
Why
grabbing
not?
Ethan's Ethan's arm.
He rubbed his
This place
temples,
isn't safe anymore.
feeling a headache coming
As
on.
they ran back up
So,
the stairs,
let me get this
alarms
straight. You're an
blared
alien,
throughout the observatory.
and you somehow ended up
Red
in my
lights
bedroom,
flashed in the
casting
middle of the
eerie
night.
shadows on the
And
walls.
now you're
Outside,
asking for my
they
help?
could hear the distant
Yes.
roar
Lyra
of
said
engines,
simply.
vehicles approaching
That's
fast.
correct.
They're here.
Ethan groaned and
Ethan
flopped
said
back
grimly.
onto his bed.
What do we do now?
This had to be some
Lyra
kind of
glanced
bizarre
around, her
dream.
mind racing.
Maybe
Then
he'd
she
eaten too
spotted
much
the old
pizza before
telescope
bed.
in the main room.
Or maybe he
Follow
was coming
me,
down with a
she
fever,
instructed. Either
leading
way,
him toward
this
it.
couldn't possibly
She adjusted
be
the
real.
controls,
But when he
aiming the
glanced over at
telescope
Lyra
the sky,
again,
she was
when
still
she
standing
activated,
there, looking
another
completely
device.
serious. A beam of
Look,
light shot upward,
Ethan said,
creating
finally
a shimmering
sitting up
portal
again.
similar to the
Even
one
if
she
I
had used
believed
to
you,
arrive in his
which
room.
I don't. Is that our
Why
way
would
out?
you come to me?
Ethan asked.
You don't even know me.
Wide-eyed. Lyra
Yes.
hesitated for a moment.
Lyra replied,
as if choosing her
But we'll have
words
to move
carefully.
quickly.
Because
There.
of your father.
Almost
she
here.
said. Sure
Quietly,
enough, the sound
my
of
dad,
boots pounding against
Ethan
the floor
frowned,
echoed through the
confused.
building.
What does
Armed
he have to
soldiers
do with
burst
any
into
of
the
this?
room. Their
He
weapons
knows my
trained on
father,
Ethan
Lyra
and Lyra.
explained. Stop
They've
right
been
there.
friends for a long
One of them
time.
commanded.
That's why
Without
I came here to
hesitation,
find safety.
Lyra grabbed
Things aren't safe for
Ethan's
me back
hand
home.
and pulled him into the
Ethan's
portal.
mind raced. For a moment,
His dad,
everything
Greg
was
Parker,
a blur of light
was just
and color.
an ordinary guy
Ethan
who
felt weightless.
worked at the
as
local
if he were
hardware
floating
store.
through space.
Sure, he liked
Then
telling
just
stories
as
about
suddenly as
camping
it had
trips and
begun,
stargazing.
the sensation
but aliens,
stopped.
and they landed
Interstellar
hard on
friendships?
solid ground.
None
They
of
were
it
in a
made
dense
sense.
forest.
Still,
Miles
there
away
was
from
something
the
about the way
observatory.
Lyra spoke.
The air
calm,
smelled fresh
confident,
and clean,
and completely
the sounds of
sincere that
birds
made it
chirping
hard to
filled the
dismiss her
silence.
outright. Ethan
So,
sat up.
let me guess.
Dazed but
Ethan
unharmed.
said dryly.
Where are we?
There's some kind
He
of
asked.
evil empire
A
chasing
safe
you across the
location,
galaxy.
Lyra replied.
And you need to
helping him
hide
to
until
his
you can
feet.
figure out your next
For
move.
now, at least.
Lyra's expression
Ethan
darkened
looked at her.
slightly. His heart
Something
still
like
racing.
that? She admitted.
That was insane.
There are people.
How did you do all that?
Beings who want to
I
capture
told
me.
you, I've
They're
had
dangerous,
practice, and they
she
won't.
said with a small smile.
Stop until they find
But
me.
this fight isn't
Ethan
over yet.
swallowed hard.
We still need to
This
find
was
the
getting
last
more
piece of the
intense
artifact.
by the second. Later
Great,
that evening, as
he
they
muttered
rested
under
by a
his breath.
small campfire,
Just great.
Ethan couldn't
For a
help
while,
but reflect
neither
on
of them
everything
spoke.
that had happened.
Ethan
They
stared
had
at
faced
Lyra,
danger,
trying to
solved
decide
puzzles,
what to do.
and narrowly
On
escaped
one
capture
hand,
multiple
this whole
times.
situation
Yet
was
despite
insane.
the odds,
On
they
the
were
other
still
hand,
she seemed
alive and
genuinely
closer than
scared,
ever to
and
completing their
honestly,
mission.
Who else
What
was she
happens
going to
after
turn
we get
to?
the last piece?
If what she said was
Ethan
true,
asked,
she
staring
really
into the
was in
flames.
trouble. Will we
And
be able to
despite
stop
everything,
them? Ethan felt
Lyra
a small
hesitated,
spark of
then
curiosity
nodded.
growing inside
I
him.
believe so.
Who wouldn't want
Once
to know
the
more
artifact
about
is
aliens
complete,
and
we
distant
can use it
planets?
to
seal the dimensional
All right,
bridge permanently,
he said finally.
That will
Let
prevent them from crossing
out a
over
deep
and
breath.
causing more harm.
Let's say I believe
But
you.
what about
What
you?
happens now?
Ethan pressed.
Lyra gave him a
What
small,
happens to you
grateful
after
smile.
all this is done?
Now
we wait.
Lyra,
And hope they
looked
don't
away.
find us. Her expression
As the minutes
unreadable.
ticked by,
I
Ethan
don't know,
realized his life was
admitted.
about to change
My
in ways
home
he couldn't
It's not safe
even begin to
anymore.
imagine.
And Earth may never fully accept me, but I'll figure it out, one step at a time. Ethan felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, he had grown to care about Lyra. The thought of saying goodbye was painful, but he knew it was inevitable. For now, though, they had work to do. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because even in the face of uncertainty, one thing was clear. Giving up was not an option. The glowing symbols on the walls of the chamber flickered and shifted, forming patterns that seemed to pulse with life. Ethan stared at them, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the strange markings. Beside him, Lyra studied the carvings, intently, her eyes narrowing as if she were trying to decipher their meaning. "What do we do?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The eerie silence of the mind made him feel like even the smallest sound could trigger something dangerous. "We need to solve this puzzle," Lyra replied. "It's a test to prove we're worthy of taking the artifact." Ethan frowned. "Worthy? What does that even mean?" "It means showing we understand its power and won't misuse it," Lyra explained. "These safeguards are designed to protect the artifact from falling into the wrong hands." "Great," Ethan muttered. "So how do we show we're worthy?" Lyra pointed to the glowing symbols. "Look closely. Do you see any patterns? Anything that repeats?" Ethan squinted at the walls, trying to focus despite the tension tightening his chest. At first, the symbols seemed random lines, circles, and shapes arranged in chaotic clusters. But as he stared longer, he noticed something. Certain symbols appear multiple times, always in the same order. They almost looked like a sequence. "I think I see something," Ethan said slowly. "Some of these symbols repeat in the same order, like a code or a pattern. Lyra nodded approvingly. Good. That's probably the key. We need to figure out the correct sequence and activate it. She stepped closer to the pedestal in the center of the room where the artifact shard rested. A series of small circular indentations surrounded the base of the pedestal, each one matching one of the symbols on the walls. We'll need to press these in the right order, she said. If we get it wrong. She trailed off, but Ethan didn't need her to finish the sentence. He could already imagine the consequences. Collapsing walls, traps springing to life, or worse. No pressure, right? He joked nervously. Together they worked quickly, comparing the symbols on the walls to the ones on the pedestal. Ethan traced the sequence in his mind, double-checking each step before calling it out to Lyra. She pressed the corresponding symbols carefully, her fingers steady despite the weight of the task dot as they reached the final symbol, the ground beneath. Then trembled slightly. For a moment, Ethan thought they'd failed, but then the glowing symbols on the walls dimmed, and the pedestal began to hum softly. A beam of light shot upward, illuminating the shard resting on top. We did it, Lyra said, relief washing over her face. She reached for the shard, but Ethan stopped her. Wait, he said. Are you sure it's safe now? Yes, Lyra assured him. The safeguards have been deactivated. We can take it. She picked up the shard, which pulsed faintly in her hand. As soon as she touched it, the carvings on the walls faded completely, leaving the chamber dark except for the soft glow of her devices. Ethan let out a shaky breath. That was intense. Before they could celebrate, however, a low rumble echoed through the mine. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the walls groaned ominously. What's happening now? Ethan asked, panic creeping into his voice. The mine is unstable, Lyra said. Activating the safeguards must have triggered some kind of collapse. We need to get out of here now. They turned and ran back the way they had come, their footsteps echoing loudly in the narrow tunnels. Behind them, the sound of crumbling rock grew louder, urging them to move faster. Ethan's heart pounded as he pushed himself harder than ever. Before, his lungs burning with each breath. Finally, they burst out of the mine entrance just as the hillside collapsed behind them. Rocks tumbled down in a deafening roar, sealing the entrance completely. Ethan and Lyra stumbled away from the destruction, collapsing onto the grass once they were a safe distance away. That was too close, Ethan gasped, clutching his knees. As he struggled to catch his breath, Lyra nodded, her expression grim. We don't have much time to rest. They'll know we retrieved the shard by now. We need to keep moving. Later that night, they took shelter in an abandoned barn on the outskirts of town. The wooden structure creaked in the wind, but it provided enough cover to hide them for the time being. Inside, Lyra examined the two shards she now carried, placing them side by side on a pile of old hay. These pieces are part of something much bigger, she said, her voice thoughtful. When all the fragments are together, they form a device capable of bridging dimensions. Bridging dimensions? Ethan repeated, raising an eyebrow. You mean like traveling between worlds? Exactly, Lyra confirmed. But that kind of power is dangerous in the wrong hands. If the hunters find all the pieces, they'll use it to conquer not just Earth, but countless other planets. Ethan frowned. Why would anyone want that kind of power? It sounds like a recipe for disaster. Because they believe they're superior, Lyra said bitterly. They think controlling the device will make them rulers of the galaxy. But they don't understand the risks. They could destroy entire civilizations if they aren't careful. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. This whole thing is insane. I never signed up for any of this. No one asks to be part of something like this, Lyra admitted. But sometimes we don't get a choice. All we can do is try to make the best of it. Her words struck a chord with Ethan. Despite everything, he realized she was right. He hadn't chosen to be dragged into this cosmic conflict, but now that he was here, he couldn't turn away. Too much was at stake, not just for Earth, but for Lyra and her people too. So what's next? Ethan asked after a long pause. Find the remaining pieces, Lyra replied. And we stop them before it's too late. Lyra grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him to his feet. Run! She shouted, her voice sharp but controlled. The blinding flash from her device had given them a brief advantage, but it wouldn't last long. Already, the soldiers were recovering, their glowing weapons scanning the area for movement. Ethan stumbled forward, his legs still shaky from the earlier chase. He followed Lyra as she darted between trees, weaving through the forest with surprising speed and precision. Despite his best efforts, Ethan struggled to keep up. Every step felt heavier than the last, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But he couldn't stop not when those men were so close behind. Where are we going? Ethan panted, glancing over his shoulder. Through the gaps in the trees, he could see flashes of light as the soldiers fired their weapons, narrowly missing. Them. There's an old cabin nearby, Lyra replied without slowing down. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them. The mention of a cabin gave Ethan a small spark of hope. Anything was better than running blindly through the woods. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning sensation in his muscles. Branches whipped at his face, and roots threatened to trip him, but he kept moving. Driven by sheer determination, after what felt like an eternity, they finally burst into a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated wooden cabin, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It looked abandoned, but to Ethan, it was a lifeline. Without hesitation, Lyra sprinted toward the structure, pulling Ethan along with her. Inside, the air was musty and thick with dust. The floor creaked under their weight as they moved deeper into the shadowy interior. Lyra quickly scanned the room, her eyes darting to every corner. "This will have to do," she said, her voice low. "We need to hide." Ethan nodded, though his heart was pounding. He ducked behind an overturned table while Lyra pressed herself against the wall near the door, her glowing eyes fixed on the entrance. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The soldiers were closing in. For a few tense moments, everything was quiet except for the sound of Ethan's rapid breathing. Then suddenly, the door burst open. Two figures stepped inside, their weapons raised and ready. Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't spot him. Lyra acted first. With a flick of her wrist, she activated another device on her belt. A holographic projection sprang to life, creating the illusion of multiple people moving around the room. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons swinging wildly as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Now, Lyra whispered urgently that Ethan didn't need to be told twice. Together, they bolted for the back door, slipping out just as the soldiers realized they'd been tricked well. They were safe for now, once they were far enough away from the cabin. Lyra led Ethan to a rocky outcrop overlooking a wide valley. They collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced at Lyra. "That was insane," he said, shaking his head. "How did you even think of that?" "I've had practice," Lyra admitted. "Back home, I learned how to handle situations like this. It's not always easy, but survival depends on quick thinking." Ethan sighed deeply. "I guess I'm learning that the hard way." As they caught their breath, Lyra pulled out the holographic map again. She studied it carefully, tracing her finger along one of the blinking dots. "The mine is still a few miles away," she said, "but we're closer than we were before." "Do you think they'll follow us there?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with worry. "They might," Lyra replied, "but we don't have a choice. We need to retrieve the artifact before they do." Ethan nodded reluctantly. As much as he wanted to turn back and forget this whole mess, he knew they couldn't. The stakes were too high, and Lyra was counting on him. "All right," he said. "Let's keep going." The journey to the mine was grueling. The terrain became rougher as they descended into the valley, with steep slopes and jagged rocks making progress slow and difficult. By the time they reached the entrance to the mine, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The mine itself was eerie, a gaping hole carved into the side of a hill, surrounded by rotting wooden beams and rusted equipment. A faint breeze carried the smell of damp earth and decay. Ethan shivered involuntarily. "This place gives me the creeps," he muttered. "It's supposed to," Lyra said. "The artifact is hidden deep inside. Only those who truly need it can find it." "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "It means we'll have to solve some kind of puzzle or test," Lyra explained. "My father mentioned that the artifacts are protected by safeguards to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands." "Great," Ethan groaned, because running from alien soldiers wasn't challenging enough. Despite his sarcasm, Ethan followed Lyra into the darkness of the mine. The air grew colder the farther they went, and the only light came from the faint glow of Lyra's devices. Their footsteps echoed eerily off the walls, and the occasional drip of water added to the unsettling atmosphere. After several minutes of walking, they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room stood a pedestal made of smooth black stone. On top of it rested a glowing shard, identical to the one Lyra carried. But as they approached, the ground beneath them began to tremble. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, alarmed. "The safeguard," Lyra replied. "Stay close." Suddenly, the walls of the chamber shifted, revealing intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. A voice deep and resonant filled the air. "Prove your worth," it intoned. "Only the worthy may claim the artifact." Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Lyra. "Okay," he said slowly. "How exactly do we prove ourselves?" Before Lyra could answer, the carvings on the walls began to rearrange themselves, forming symbols and patterns that glowed brightly. It was clear they were being challenged, but whether they could succeed remained to be seen. "This isn't going to be easy," Lyra said quietly, "but we don't have a choice. Let's figure it out together." With no other options, Ethan nodded. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain: giving up wasn't an option. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a sense of dread hanging over him like a storm cloud. He glanced at Lyra, who was sitting quietly on the floor near his desk, her eyes fixed on the small metallic object she had shown him the night before. The artifact shimmered faintly in the sunlight streaming through the window, as if it were alive and waiting for something. "Do you think they're already here?" Ethan asked nervously, breaking the silence. Lyra looked up at him, her expression serious. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we can't stay in one place for too long. If they find us, they'll come after everyone you care about." Ethan swallowed hard. The thought of his family being in danger made his stomach twist into knots. "Then what's the plan? How do we find the other pieces of this thing?" Lyra pulled a small device from her belt. It looked like a flat, glowing disc. She pressed a button, and a holographic map appeared in the air above it. Tiny dots blinked on the map, scattered across the region. "These are the locations of the remaining fragments," she explained. "We need to retrieve them before the hunters do." Ethan studied the map, his heart sinking. That's going to take forever. And how are we supposed to get to all these places without anyone noticing? "We'll start with the closest one," Lyra said firmly, "and we'll figure out the rest as we go." Before they could make any plans, Ethan heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside. His pulse quickened. "Someone's here," he whispered, rushing to the window. Peering through the blinds, he saw a black van parked at the edge of his driveway. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark uniforms that seemed too sleek and futuristic to belong to anyone ordinary. "They're here," Ethan hissed, turning back to Lyra. "What do we do?" Lyra's eyes narrowed as she stared at the men through the wall as if she could see them without even looking. "They found me faster than I expected. We need to leave. Now." "But where?" Ethan asked, panic rising in his chest. "If we run, they'll just follow us." "Not if we lose them first," Lyra said. She grabbed the metallic shard and slipped it back into her pouch. Then she grabbed Ethan's hand. "Trust me." Without another word, she led him out of the room and down the hallway toward the back door. They moved quickly but quietly,
avoiding the creaky floorboards that might alert his parents or sister. As they reached the kitchen, Ethan hesitated. "What about my family? Shouldn't we warn them?" "There's no time," Lyra said urgently. "If we stay, they'll use your family against us." "We have to go." Reluctantly, Ethan nodded. He hated leaving without saying goodbye, but he knew Lyra was right. They slipped out the back door and into the woods behind the house, moving as fast as they could without making noise. Behind them, Ethan could hear voices calling out. The men were searching the house. He didn't dare look back, focusing instead on keeping up with Lyra as she darted between trees and ducked under low-hanging branches. After several minutes of running, they reached a narrow stream that cut through the forest. Lyra stopped abruptly and knelt by the water. "What are you doing?" Ethan panted, leaning over to catch his breath. "Covering our tracks," she replied. She scooped up handfuls of mud and smeared it over their shoes, erasing any footprints they might have left behind. "They'll follow us if they can. This will slow them down." Once she was satisfied, they continued deeper into the woods. The sun filtered through the canopy of leaves above, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Despite the beauty of the forest, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made him jumped out. After what felt like hours, Lyra finally slowed down. She pointed to a cluster of boulders ahead. "We'll stop there for now," she said. "We need to rest and figure out our next move." Ethan collapsed onto the cool grass beside the rocks, his legs burning from the long run. "How far away is the closest piece of the artifact?" he asked. "About 10 miles, Lyra replied, studying the holographic map again. "It's hidden in an old mine, but getting there won't be easy." "Of course it won't," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Nothing about this is easy." As they sat there catching their breath, Lyra turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You've been handling this surprisingly well," she said. "Most people would have panicked or refused to help by now." Ethan shrugged, though he wasn't sure if he deserved the compliment. "I don't really have a choice, do I? Besides, if what you're saying is true, and I'm starting to believe it is, then sitting around isn't going to solve anything." Lyra smiled faintly. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan. That's why I came to you." Her words caught him off guard. For the first time since this whole mess began, Ethan felt a flicker of confidence. Maybe he wasn't completely useless. In this situation, maybe he could actually make a difference. But their moment of calm was short-lived. A sharp whistling sound cut through the air, followed by a loud crash nearby. Ethan and Lyra both jumped to their feet, hearts racing. "What was that?" Ethan whispered. Lyra's eyes darted around, scanning the trees. "They found us." Sure enough, the sound of footsteps echoed through the forest, growing louder with each passing second. Lyra grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled him behind. "One of the larger boulders. Stay low," she instructed. "Don't move until I say so." Peeking cautiously over the rock, Ethan saw 2 figures emerge from the trees. They wore the same sleek uniforms as the men who had arrived at his house earlier. In their hands they carried strange weapons that glowed faintly, emitting a soft hum. Ethan's blood ran cold. These weren't ordinary hunters, they were soldiers, equipped with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. One of the men raised his weapon and fired a bolt of energy toward their hiding spot. It hit the ground just inches from where Ethan and Lyra crouched, sending dirt and debris flying into the air. Ethan instinctively ducked, shielding his face with his arms. "We can't stay here," he hissed. "I know," Lyra replied. She pulled out the glowing disc again and tapped a sequence of buttons. A moment later, a blinding flash of light erupted from the device, temporarily disorienting the soldiers. Taking advantage of the distraction, L once. The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling groggy and disoriented. For a moment, he thought the strange events of the previous night had been nothing more than a vivid dream. But as he sat up in bed, he noticed Lyra sitting cross-legged on the floor. Near his desk, her glowing eyes fixed intently on the ceiling. She seemed calm, almost meditative, but there was an underlying tension in the way she held herself. Good morning? Ethan said hesitantly, rubbing his eyes. Lyra turned her head to look at him. Good morning, she replied softly. Did you sleep well? Ethan blinked a few times, still trying to process the reality of having an alien visitor in his room. Not really, he admitted. I don't think anyone could sleep after something like last night. Lyra nodded sympathetically. I understand. This must be overwhelming for you. You think? Ethan muttered under his breath. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood up, stretching. Okay, so here's the thing. I need answers, like real answers. Starting with my dad. What exactly is his connection to all this? Lyra hesitated before responding. Your father knows my father, Kale. They've been friends for many years. Your father has helped us keep our presence on Earth hidden from those who would misuse it. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Wait, my dad? Friends with an alien? That doesn't sound like the same guy who spends half his weekends fixing leaky pipes and grilling burgers. He's done extraordinary things, Lyra said firmly. Things most people wouldn't believe. But I assure you, everything I'm telling you is true. Ethan shook his head, pacing back and forth across the small room. This is insane. Absolutely insane. How am I supposed to wrap my head around any of this? I know it's difficult, Lyra said gently. But you don't have to decide anything right now. Just trust me when I say that we need your help. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway outside his door. His heart skipped a beat. Oh no, he whispered. My mom's awake. She can't see you here. Lyra stood up quickly, her movements smooth and silent. Don't worry, I'll hide. She glanced around the room and slipped into the closet, pulling the door closed just as Ethan's mom knocked lightly on his bedroom door. Ethan? Her voice called out. Are you up yet? Yeah, Mom, Ethan replied, forcing a casual tone. Just getting ready. His mom opened the door and peeped inside. You slept late again, she said with a teasing smile. Breakfast will be ready soon. Thanks, Mom, Ethan said, giving her a quick hug to distract her from looking too closely at his messy room or the glowing girl hiding in his closet. Once she left, Ethan let out a sigh of relief and motioned for Lyra to come out. That was close, he said, running a hand through his hair. We can't keep doing this. If my family finds out about you, they'll freak out. I agree, Lyra said. But we don't have much time. The ones chasing me, they're already searching for me here. If they find us... She trailed off, but Ethan didn't need her to finish the sentence. He could see the fear in her eyes. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. First, we talked to my dad. He owes me some explanations. Later that afternoon, Ethan found his dad, Greg, tinkering in the garage. Tools were scattered across the workbench, and the smell of oil hung heavy in the air. Greg looked up as Ethan entered, wiping his hands on a rag. Hey, kiddo, Greg said with a grin. What's up? Ethan crossed his arms and leaned against the doorway. Dad, we need to talk. Greg's smile faded slightly. Sure, son. What's on your mind? It's about aliens, Ethan said bluntly. For a split second, Greg froze, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed nervously. Aliens? Where did that come from? Cut the act, Dad, Ethan snapped. Last night, one showed up in my room. A girl named Lyra. She says her dad's friends with you. Care to explain? Greg's face went pale. He set the rag down slowly and sighed. I was hoping you'd never have to deal with this. So it's true? Ethan demanded. You've been hanging out with aliens? For how long? Greg gestured for Ethan to sit down. Reluctantly, Ethan pulled up a stool and listened as his dad began to explain. Started years ago, Greg said quietly. I was camping alone in the woods one night when I saw something unusual, a bright light descending from the sky. At first,
I thought it was a meteor or something, but then I realized it was a ship, a real spaceship. Ethan stared at him, wide-eyed. And you just walked up to it? I was curious, Greg admitted. When I got closer, I met Kale. He looked human enough, but he told me he was from another world. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories about our lives and our worlds. Over time, we became friends. But why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked, frustration creeping into his voice. Or Mom. Or anyone. Because it wasn't safe, Greg said firmly. If word got out, people would panic. Governments would try to exploit them, maybe even hurt them. I promised Kale I'd keep his secret. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of everything. So what does this have to do with Lyra? Why is she here? Greg's expression darkened. Kale mentioned once that his people are divided. There's a faction that wants to use advanced technology for their own gain, no matter the cost. If Lyra's here, it means they're after her and possibly us too. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. This keeps getting worse. I'm sorry, Ethan, Greg said, placing a hand on his shoulder. I never wanted you to get involved in this. But since you are, we'll figure it out together. As Ethan left the garage, his mind raced with questions. His dad had always been the kind of guy who liked fixing things, cars, appliances, problems, around the house. But now it seemed he'd been fixing something much bigger, something Ethan barely understood. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Lyra, a girl who claimed to be running for her life. Back in his room, Lyra looked up as Ethan entered. How did it go? She asked cautiously. He knows you're here, Ethan replied. And he confirmed everything you said. But now we've got bigger problems. Apparently, the people chasing you aren't just dangerous, they're relentless. Lyra nodded grimly. I knew they'd follow me eventually. We'll need to leave soon. It's not safe for your family to stay involved. Leave, Ethan repeated, shocked. Where exactly are we supposed to go? To find the artifact, Lyra said. It's the reason they're after me. If we can retrieve it before they do, we might stand a chance. The artifact? Ethan frowned. What artifact? Lyra hesitated, then reached into a pouch strapped to her belt. She pulled out a small, metallic object that shimmered faintly in the light. This is part of it. There are others scattered across this planet. Together they form a device capable of bridging dimensions. If the wrong people get hold of it. She didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan didn't need her to. He could already picture the chaos such power could unleash. All right, he said finally. Let's find the rest of these pieces. But you're going to have to tell me everything along the way. No more secrets. Lyra smiled faintly. Deal. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows. Across Ethan's room, he realized his ordinary life had officially ended. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing for sure. He was in way over his head. Ethan Parker was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner in the corner. It was late, and everyone in the house had gone to sleep hours ago. His mom and dad were probably sound, asleep in their bedroom down the hall, and his little sister's soft breathing could be heard through the thin walls. Ethan, however, couldn't fall asleep. He tossed and turned, but nothing seemed to help. His mind kept racing with thoughts about school, friends, and random things that didn't make much sense. Just as he started to feel drowsy, a strange noise caught his attention. At first, it sounded like static electricity crackling somewhere nearby. Then, almost instantly, the sound grew louder, filling the room with an eerie hum. Ethan sat up quickly, his heart pounding. He looked around, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. The lamp on his nightstand flickered once before steadying itself again. What's going on? Ethan whispered to himself, gripping the edge of his blanket tightly before he could get up to check what was happening. Something incredible happened. A bright light began to glow near his closet. It wasn't harsh or blinding, more like a shimmering ripple in the air, as if someone
had spilled oil onto water and let it spread. Ethan's eyes widened in shock. He wanted to call out for his parents, but no words came out. All he could do was watch as the glowing patch grew bigger and brighter. And then, without warning, a figure stepped out of the light. Ethan froze completely. For a moment, he thought he might be dreaming. Standing in front of him was a girl who looked about his age. She had long, silvery hair that fell past her shoulders and big, almond-shaped eyes that sparkled faintly, like they held tiny stars inside them. Her clothes were strange, too tight-fitting and metallic-looking, shimmering softly under the dim light of his room. She didn't look scared or lost. Instead, she stood there calmly, as if stepping out of glowing portals in the people's bedrooms. Was perfectly normal. "Hi," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm Lyra." Ethan blinked several times, unsure if he should laugh, scream, or pinch himself to wake up. Hi?" he managed to say after a long pause. "Who are you? And how did you just appear in my room?" Lyra tilted her head slightly, studying him with those mesmerizing eyes. "It's complicated," she admitted. "But I need your help." "My help?" Ethan repeated, still struggling to process everything. "You're telling me you just popped into my room from wherever that is?" He pointed vaguely toward the fading glow near his closet. "And now you want my help?" She nodded. "Yes, I wouldn't have come here if I had any other choice." Ethan opened his mouth to respond but stopped when he noticed something odd. The air around Lyra seemed different somehow, like it vibrated slightly, even though nothing else in the room moved. He shook his head, trying to focus. Okay, he said slowly. "Let's start with the basics. Where exactly did you come from?" "I'm not from Earth," Lyra replied matter-of-factly. "I'm from a planet called Zathera. It's very far away." Ethan stared at her, waiting for the punchline. When none came, he sighed deeply. "Right, of course you are. Aliens. Why not?" He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "So, let me get this straight, you're an alien, and you somehow ended up in my bedroom, in the middle of the night, and now you're asking for my help?" "Yes," Lyra said simply. "That's correct." Ethan groaned and flopped back onto his bed. This had to be some kind of bizarre dream. Maybe he'd eaten too much pizza before bed, or maybe he was coming down with a fever. Either way, this couldn't possibly be real. But when he glanced over at Lyra again, she was still standing there, looking completely serious. "Look," Ethan said, finally sitting up again. "Even if I believed you, which I don't, why would you come to me? You don't even know me." Lyra hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "Because of your father," she said quietly. "My dad?" Ethan frowned, confused. "What does he have to do with any of this?" "He knows my father," Lyra explained. "They've been friends for a long time. That's why I came here to find safety. Things aren't safe for me back home." Ethan's mind raced. His dad, Greg Parker, was just an ordinary guy who worked at the local hardware store. Sure, he liked telling stories about camping trips and stargazing, but aliens? Interstellar friendships? None of it made sense. Still, there was something about the way Lyra spoke calm, confident, and completely sincere that made it hard to dismiss her outright. "So, let me guess," Ethan said dryly. "There's some kind of evil empire chasing you across the galaxy, and you need to hide until you can figure out your next move." Lyra's expression darkened slightly. "Something like that," she admitted. "There are people, beings who want to capture me. They're dangerous, and they won't stop until they find me." Ethan swallowed hard. This was getting more intense by the second. "Great," he muttered under his breath. "Just great." For a while, neither of them spoke. Ethan stared at Lyra, trying to decide what to do. On one hand, this whole situation was insane. On the other hand, she seemed genuinely scared, and honestly, who else was she going to turn to? If what she said was true,
She really was in trouble. And despite everything, Ethan felt a small spark of curiosity growing inside him. Who wouldn't want to know more about aliens and distant planets? All right, he said finally, letting out a deep breath. Let's say I believe you. What happens now? Lyra gave him a small, grateful smile. Now we wait and hope they don't find us. As the minutes ticked by, Ethan realized his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even begin to imagine. Lyra grabbed Ethan's hand and pulled him to his feet. Run! She shouted, her voice sharp but controlled. The blinding flash from her device had given them a brief advantage, but it wouldn't last long. Already, the soldiers were recovering, their glowing weapons scanning the area for movement. Ethan stumbled forward, his legs still shaky from the earlier chase. He followed Lyra as she darted between trees, weaving through the forest with surprising speed and precision. Despite his best efforts, Ethan struggled to keep up. Every step felt heavier than the last, and his breath came in ragged gasps. But he couldn't stop not when those men were so close behind. Where are we going? Ethan panted, glancing over his shoulder. Through the gaps in the trees, he could see flashes of light as the soldiers fired their weapons, narrowly missing them. There's an old cabin nearby, Lyra replied without slowing down. If we can reach it, we might be able to lose them. The mention of a cabin gave Ethan a small spark of hope. Anything was better than running blindly through the woods. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning sensation in his muscles. Branches whipped at his face, and roots threatened to trip him, but he kept moving. Driven by sheer determination, after what felt like an eternity, they finally burst into a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated wooden cabin, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. It looked abandoned, but to Ethan, it was a lifeline. Without hesitation, Lyra sprinted toward the structure, pulling Ethan along with her. Inside, the air was musty and thick with dust. The floor creaked under their weight as they moved deeper into the shadowy interior. Lyra quickly scanned the room, her eyes darting to every corner. This will have to do, she said, her voice low. We need to hide. Ethan nodded, though his heart was pounding. He ducked behind an overturned table while Lyra pressed herself against the wall near the door, her glowing eyes fixed on the entrance. Outside, the sound of footsteps grew louder. The soldiers were closing in. For a few tense moments, everything was quiet except for the sound of Ethan's rapid breathing. Then suddenly, the door burst open. Two figures stepped inside, their weapons raised and ready. Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't spot him. Lyra acted first. With a flick of her wrist, she activated another device on her belt. A holographic projection sprang to life, creating the illusion of multiple people moving around the room. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons swinging wildly as they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Now, Lyra whispered urgently that Ethan didn't need to be told twice. Together, they bolted for the back door, slipping out just as the soldiers realized they'd been tricked well. They were safe for now, once they were far enough away from the cabin. Lyra led Ethan to a rocky outcrop overlooking a wide valley. They collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead and glanced at Lyra. That was insane, he said, shaking his head. How did you even think of that? I've had practice, Lyra admitted. Back home, I learned how to handle situations like this. It's not always easy, but survival depends on quick thinking. Ethan sighed deeply. I guess I'm learning that the hard way. As they caught their breath, Lyra pulled out the holographic map again. She studied it carefully, tracing her finger along one of the blinking dots. The mine is still a few miles away, she said, but we're closer than we were before. Do you think they'll follow us there? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with worry. They might, Lyra replied, but we don't have a choice. We need to retrieve the artifact before they do. Ethan nodded reluctantly. As much as he wanted to turn back and forget this whole mess, he knew they couldn't. The stakes were too high, and Lyra was counting on him. All right, he said. Let's keep going.
The journey to the mine was grueling. The terrain became rougher as they descended into the valley, with steep slopes and jagged rocks making progress slow and difficult. By the time they reached the entrance to the mine, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. The mine itself was eerie, a gaping hole carved into the side of a hill, surrounded by rotting wooden beams and rusted equipment. A faint breeze carried the smell of damp earth and decay. Ethan shivered involuntarily.
This place gives me the creeps, he muttered.
It's supposed to, Lyra said. The artifact is hidden deep inside. Only those who truly need it can find it. What does that mean? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. It means we'll have to solve some kind of puzzle or test, Lyra explained. My father mentioned that the artifacts are protected by safeguards to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Great, Ethan groaned, because running from alien soldiers wasn't challenging enough. Despite his sarcasm, Ethan followed Lyra into the darkness of the mine. The air grew colder the farther they went, and the only light came from the faint glow of Lyra's devices. Their footsteps echoed eerily off the walls, and the occasional drip of water added to the unsettling atmosphere. After several minutes of walking, they reached a large chamber. In the center of the room stood a pedestal made of smooth black stone. On top of it rested a glowing shard, identical to the one Lyra carried. But as they approached, the ground beneath them began to tremble. What's happening? Ethan asked, alarmed. The safeguard, Lyra replied. Stay close. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber shifted, revealing intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with energy. A voice deep and resonant filled the air. Prove your worth, it intoned. Only the worthy may claim the artifact. Ethan exchanged a worried glance with Lyra. Okay, he said slowly. How exactly do we prove ourselves? Before Lyra could answer, the carvings on the walls began to rearrange themselves, forming symbols and patterns that glowed brightly. It was clear they were being challenged, but whether they could succeed remained to be seen. This isn't going to be easy, Lyra said quietly, but we don't have a choice. Let's figure it out together. With no other options, Ethan nodded. Whatever lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. Giving up wasn't an option.